This evening we have a rather large subject on our hands. We will have to get into it as quickly and basically as possible. We have been discussing the Indian system of yoga, and we have been attempting to point out that the entire system, like that of Neoplatonism among the Alexandrian Greeks, arises from the conviction that it is possible for the human being to unfold faculties and powers not generally recognized or available. This, to a great degree, distinguishes the ancient and the modern concepts of learning. For in the modern concept, man may unfold powers, but only through the extension of his temporal knowledge. In the East, the individual is taught that he can unfold himself through the investigation of his own internal life and the gradual ordering of it by certain specific disciplines. Raja Yoga is properly called the princely discipline, or the royal way of union, from Raja, princely or royal, and Yoga, union. And in it, all of the paths of yoga meet. It is the Lord over the yogas, or the waves of human growth. Today, in practice, even in Asia, the unity of the various systems under the Raja Yoga concept is not generally recognized. But tonight we must deal with the direct and a positive approach to the concept of illumination, recognizing that the other yogas are very largely cathartic disciplines, that is, methods of purification, whereas Raja Yoga recapitulates them all through its steps and stages and then passes on to the positive consideration of human enlightenment. We know also that all of the contrary notwithstanding, that the actual disciplines of Raja Yoga are not available in the West. Many works relating to the subject have been written, and some Eastern teachers have attempted to explain it. But all those who were legitimate representatives of their proper schools in Asia were under certain obligations regarding the dissemination of this knowledge. Therefore, they could proceed a way only, and then were required by their own vows to remain silent. Probably this is just as well, because actually, as Swami Vivekananda learned to his sorrow, Occidental man is differently constituted psychologically, and certainly far different in his general outlook on life from Eastern man. His body is not under the discipline that is familiar to the Oriental. His mind and emotions are not under discipline. And therefore the immediate attempt to enforce these Eastern rules upon his conduct and character is almost certain to result in trouble. But for this evening, we want to study the principles involved in this theory. Because these principles are true or they are not true. If they are true, then it is the proper duty of Western man to find a method of adapting these principles to his own requirements. This process has gone on to some degree. It even went on in India, where we find the basic teachings of yoga gradually modified through various sects, drifting in a still more modified form into the great stream of Buddhist metaphysics. Raja Yoga assumes at the beginning much that was assumed in early Western science, namely that man is a miniature of a larger universal pattern. That man is a miniature universe, and the universe is a grand person. This larger universe contains within it all of the energies, powers, laws, and principles required for its own continuance and maintenance. A man possesses within himself also, hidden but real, the energies, powers, and principles necessary for his own enlightenment. And the method of growth within man is identical in principle with the method of growth in nature. And the unfoldment of the human being is according to natural law. The difference between discipline and the haphazard existence that we have called life lies in the fact that under discipline, man comes into a voluntary and positive relationship with the laws governing his own existence. A Greek philosopher was once asked to define the difference between a wise and a foolish man, and he replied that a wise man loves to do those very things that foolish men have to do against their wills. And this is a more or less basic statement. The individual who is untrained, undisciplined, unenlightened, is constantly confronted with challenge. He must gradually learn by trial and error the way he should go. He must correct his own mistakes. He must gradually learn to control his own nature and his own appetites. If, however, he has a resolution within him, a determination to cooperate with the plan of his own existence, then two things are necessary. First, that he shall have some knowledge of this plan, and second, that he shall have the courage, the conviction, the energy, and the endurance to accomplish those ends which he recognizes to be right and proper. The theoretical part of the yogas, therefore, deals with that instruction, that knowledge, by which the individual comes to know the science of his own salvation. He comes to understand the instruments and tools with which he must work, and he gains a strong theoretical understanding of the principles and methods by which he can attain such ends as he recognizes to be right and proper. Thus in yoga, we have this twofold problem. The problem of instruction, and then the problem of action. The individual will not become wise through instruction alone. He may become very unhappy as a result of action alone. But if instruction and action are united and formed into a proper partnership, then the individual does that which he knows and knows that which he does. Under such condition, his advancement and his progress are reasonable. Now, Raja Yoga begins to deal with something that is a little bit beyond the obvious and the apparent. And in order to make it as simple as we can, and at the same time to give a broad basis for further thought and research among those who are so interested, we're going to pause for just a moment and consider some opinions of Pythagoras, who was strongly influenced by Eastern philosophy, having been initiated into the Hindu mysteries at Ellora and Alabama. Pythagoras gave us a formula for the construction of the human soul. And he declared this soul to be a symmetrical geometric solid. He also recognized that the soul itself contained or possessed 7 energies, and that these energies could be caused to correspond symbolically with the orbits of the 7 planets of the solar system. Pythagoras created the concept that the elements correspond to the human body, that the 7 planetary orbits correspond to the human soul, and that the constellational firmament corresponds to the human spirit. Paracelsus of Hohenheim, the Swiss physician, followed much this same concept. Therefore, he declared that between the spiritual and material lives of man, there was an interval which was crossed or bridged by the orbits of the planets, and that the planets, therefore, could properly be regarded as symbolic of the human soul. Also, Pythagoras created what he called a monochord, or a single string, which he stretched between the earth below and the firmament above. He then placed frets upon this string, breaks upon the musical chords. These frets he placed according to the orbits of the planets, creating a musical system, which finds its analogy in India in the famous Veena, or in musical instrument of Shiva. We find there also the belief that this group of levels or planes, these orbits, or this complete octave divided into its departments, its tonal intervals, and things of that nature, corresponded to the structure of the human soul. Pythagoras then also recognized what he called the eighth part of the soul, which was its generative function, by means of which it made possible the perpetuation of bodies. Today in psychology, we think of the soul as a sort of compound of the mental, intellectual, and emotional, passional complex in man. Even today, it is not always evident that psychologists distinguish between the mind and the emotions as parts of the soul structure. But the term soul, psychologically, is generally applied to these subconscious or subjective sources of mind and emotion. And the individual is therefore a living soul within a body. And the soul is associated more and more definitely with the person, so that a soul within a body is a person within a body. Now to return to Raja Yoga for a moment. We know that in the yoga system there is a very elaborate discussion of a kind of physiology, a psychophysiology or a neurophysiology, and that this physiology deals with certain internal functions of man, and arranges this internal physiological structure in the form of a mysterious inverted tree with its root in the brain and its trunk extending down the spinal cord. This trunk consists of a great or mysterious nerve through which and in which passes a very wonderful and mysterious power, which is called the Kundali Shakti. This power, or the fire mist, the fire of life in man, is then distributed from the central nadi, or the Sushumna nerve, through smaller nerves throughout the body, until the entire structure of man's animation is supported by this intricate network of nerves, carrying within them a mysterious, invisible energy. Now, in this concept, we are dealing not primarily with the physical nervous system of the body. We are dealing, rather, with a distribution in the soul itself. And the mysterious chakras, or wheels upon the spinal cord, the various plexi and ganglia involved in the yoga system, are not actually physical centers in the body. They are more correctly and definitely psychic centers within the body, existing within the broad structure of what we call the soul itself. Thus, your anatomy and physiology in yoga is upon a psychic level. And because it is upon a psychic level, it is influenced, changed, modified, directed, governed, distributed by means of the mysterious power of the human will. Now, when we go into the study of this a little more carefully, we can get a somewhat simpler picture. Now, all pictures, all symbols are inadequate, let us face it. Therefore, in any symbolism which I may try to draw for you, something is going to be wrong, because symbolism is not identical with the subject under consideration. There must always be a limitation in the symbolism. And recognizing that, however, it is still possible to convey an idea, a certain degree of reality. And it is important that the listener should not extend the analogy beyond the point we take it, in other words. Because if he does, he may then run into conflict because of symbolical limitations. Just go as far as we recommend with this, and then let it rest for the moment. Let us now imagine that man contains within himself the elements of a cosmos. And he has a body composed of elements. These elements, in the symbolism of antiquity, were four in number: earth, fire, air, and water, to which the alchemists added a mysterious fifth element, which they called Azoth, and which in the East is more or less associated with the idea of Akasha. Now this body of elements forms the corporeal constitution of man. In modern Western science, we have many more elements, but the principle of the symbolism is the same. So the body of man consists of something that resembles the physical planet Earth itself, with its elements, with its parts, and like the Earth itself, supporting innumerable living things upon and within it. The psychic life of man corresponds with the solar system which surrounds the Earth, and is the abode of certain wandering bodies called planets. And these planets, in a mysterious way, constitute together a psychic atmosphere. And both Eastern and Western astrological speculation points out that the positions, motions, and mutations of these planets may affect corporeal things. So that the psychic life of man really consists of a kind of solar system. And this psychic life, therefore, has within it 7 distinguishable levels or regions of qualities. And these levels or regions become the basis for the vitalization of the 7 psychic powers of man's experience. In other words, from one level may come his rational powers, from another his emotional intensities, from a third his imaginative faculties, from a fourth his intellectual concepts as differentiated from his rationality. From each of these levels of the soul, therefore, energies are constantly made manifest, and man lives psychically by the expenditure and release of these energies upon various levels of his own consciousness. Thus, from within the psychic life of the individual, there is constantly flowing a 7-fold stream of psychic energy and vitality, capable of sustaining the 7 essential functions of the soul itself. Thus we have, for example, if we want to consider it, something in this order. The reflective power of the soul, or contemplative faculty, which is associated with Saturn. The rational, reasonable, philosophical aspect of the soul, which is associated with Jupiter. The dynamic, aggressive, combative instincts of the soul associated with Mars. The vital or life principle of the soul itself, which we would commonly term libido, with the Sun. The amatory powers of the soul with Venus. The concrete intellectual and the so-called ordinary thinking of the soul with Mercury. The imaginative power with the Moon. And the generative power, the 8th, the one which was not included in the original pattern, is the overlapping of the soul's energy with the physical structure of nature. Now, if these conditions may be said to exist within man, we can then begin to understand, perhaps, the story of the Babylonian myth of this star at the 7 gates. We find in the ancient story that Tammuz, the hero god, died and was carried to the underworld, where he came across the threshold of the world of sin. Now, sin in this case doesn't mean evil. Sin was the god of death in the Babylonian concept. And this star, because of her great love for Tammuz, made the hazardous pilgrimage down through the 7 spheres in order to rescue Tammuz from the land of no return. And at each gate, as she descended, the guardians of the gate took from her one of her symbols of royalty and power. The first gate of crown was removed from her, and so on until at the time when she reached the last or the seventh gate and entered into the sphere of darkness. She had been deprived of all of her adornments and her raiment, and entered naked into the world of death. Now, of course, this is a highly symbolical account, but here we have, perhaps, a story which can be closely associated with our principle of Raja Yoga, as you will see a little later. Now, we can take another parallel to this, which can be of interest to us. In the Pymanderies of Hermes, one of the works of the Alexandrian Hermetic school about the beginning of the Christian era, we have the mysterious account of the journey of the soul, or the journey of the consciousness, through the seven gates of the planetary orbits. And we also learn from this work that when man was created by the gods, he descended through the seven orbits, and each of these orbits bestowed a soul power upon him, until when he finally reached the earth, he was a body containing the power of the seven genii of the soul spheres, or the orbits of the planets. Now we can take another example, which is also quite parallel, but perhaps not as detailed, and that is the vision of John on Patmos. Here we find that John the Evangelist is lifted up through a mysterious circumstance associated with the mystery of the seven churches which are in Asia. Now, these seven churches are actually, again, references to the seven powers of the soul. And having been raised upward to the firmament, he passed through a little door in the firmament and came out into the spiritual world above. Now, anyone who has been a student of Raja Yoga will know exactly what this is telling about, because they will realize that the entrance to the world above corresponds to the unfolding of the 1,000-petal lotus in the brain. Now we have another parallel that comes to us from the apocryphal writings of Islam, the famous night journey of Muhammad to heaven. He is said to have reached Jerusalem on the back of a mysterious being with a human head and the body of a horse and the tail of a peacock called El Borak. Here, when he stood upon the rock Moriah of the stone of the threshing floor of the Jebusite at Solomon's temple, he beheld a ladder of silken cords fall from heaven. And he ascended through the gates of the seven planets. And at each one of the gates stood one of the prophets. And these prophets he permitted him to enter. And finally he ascended through the seventh gate, at the gate of which, incidentally, was Jesus. And then he was allowed to enter into the mystery of the divine presence that lay beyond. These are all stories of the journey, the perilous journey of the psychic nature through its own bodies or levels. Here then we begin to see a picture that perhaps makes a little bit of meaning. We remember also the Mithraic ladder of 7 rungs used in the Persian mysteries. And we are constantly in the presence of this ladder upon which the angels ascend and descend, as in the vision of Jacob. Thus, let us for a moment recognize something that we might not at first realize or understand, namely that the psyche of man is actually a septenary structure, that it is in levels, and that these levels are the sources or causes of certain specialized psychic energy, and that this psychic energy in its various manifestations has much to do, in fact everything to do, with the levels of life upon which we live. Now, to take the ordinary experience of man, he is never aware of this stratification of his own soul. And someday it is my profound suspicion that psychologists are going to return to the Pythagorean geometric pattern for the soul. But in the meantime, we only know that conglomeration of impulses come out from within us. that these impulses are often conflicting, and that in their totality they represent limitation. Let us approach it in this way. Always this ladder of souls, or this soul quality ladder, through which the individual must pass, or the rungs of which he must climb. Always these rungs have to do either with the diminishing of reality, as in the case of the descent of Istar, or the diminishing of illusion, as in the ascent of Mohammed, or the revelation of St. John. Brought down to the level of ethics, brought down to the practical level of human living, each individual is a victim of the intensities of his own soul nature. And while this soul nature is and can be a tremendous and wonderful power within him, we have to tie the 7 parts of the soul again with the 7 deadly sins of theology and the 7 cardinal virtues. For the 7 cardinal virtues are nothing but the redemption of the 7 deadly sins. And over the control and direction and administration of this psychic pattern are the original 7 sacraments of the Church. There is a pattern here which we'll have to introduce you to step by step, but I think you will begin to see what we are talking about. Now, the 7 deadly sins certainly do not originate in the body, nor do the 7 cardinal virtues come as the result of diet, bathing, and exercise. There is something much more profound involved than this. Actually, all of these powers, principles, and qualities exist within the psychic zone rather than within the physical body of the individual. And the physical body is plagued by the excesses of the soul, even as it is redeemed and purified by the moderation of the soul. It is this psychic life, therefore, that presents the individual with a stratified pattern of illusion. Now, in the initiations of Buddha, in the Saptaparna Cavern, the 7 rooms of initiation, in the Indian story, and in the various chambers of initiation in the ancient rituals and rites of practically all mysteries, the neophyte passed through these rooms of ordeals in which he was tested and tried, in which he was subjected to all kinds of fantasy and illusion. And behind the Eastern concept of the soul lies the fact that this sphere, with its 7 qualities, represents essentially Maya, or the world of illusion. Now, the reason why it is the world of illusion is because it is the world of seeming, the world of things that are not true or real in themselves. The soul consists of energies which have intensity, but which in themselves do not essentially solve their own problem or bring reality out of the chaos of their own intensities. Therefore, regeneration, as in alchemy, which we will begin to consider next week, where we study the mystery of the transmutation of the 7 metals, which are again these same principles, and the gradual bringing of these metals together to form the lapis philosophorum, or the stone of the wise, that in the transmutation of base metals, we have exactly the problem of the soul. For alchemy is working with the mystery of the soul, and the philosopher's stone is the perfected soul. In the New Testament, the soul appears as the wedding garment, in connection with the famous marriage of the bridegroom and the lamb. The mystery of the soul is also given to us symbolically in the description of the vestments of the high priest of Israel, where each of his garments and each of the symbolic adornments of the tabernacle and the various furnishings and curtains of the Temple of Solomon all refer to the same basic situation. Now, man as a being is seeking to achieve self-consciousness at first. That is his first goal. It is not his ultimate goal, as we've already expressed. But there must be the gradual integration of the psychic nature before the individual can pass through the mystery of the orbits of the planets and pass again through the little door that leads above the firmament, as described in the Apocalypse. So what have we here? In the book of Revelation, we have the mystery of the opening of the seven seals, the mystery of the seven vials, the mystery of the septenary, the seven trumpets. We have the great being of the mysteries walking amidst the seven branches of the candlestick. We have the seven-branch candlestick with its seven lights. All of these belong to the soul level of human experience and consciousness. So in the Yogas, we have this little simple problem on our hands. Namely, that in the life of man, the soul, the wanderer, described by the Greeks as always walking with a limp, the cripple, is actually man's own undisciplined, imperfect psychic existence. A psychic existence which is now capable of getting into so many difficulties that hundreds of books have been written describing the various ailments which involve everything from neuroses to fixations to phobias to manias and a whole group of mental disease from paranoia to the manic depressive. We also know that man's dreams arising in his psychic life are notable for their disturbances, for their confusions, for the fantasy and phantasmagoria in them. Also, that in his daily living, most of his existence is dominated by his imaginations, and that in looking at various things he sees them not as they are, but according to his own believing, according to the pressures of his own psychic life, so that to him good may appear bad and bad may appear good. Thus there is this incredible, undisciplined interval, recognizable as a septenary structure, through which the individual must ascend by a series of experiences. In other words, these seven levels represent the seven rooms of his house, in which are living persons who are not entirely civilized and certainly not coordinated to his major objectives. He must meet with each of them, convert it, and cause it to become a disciple of his purpose, or he cannot go on. In this, then, we have the ordering of the soul, the gradual process of the application of will, which is the magic wand of the magician, to the energies which normally control him, and over which he must finally become the controlling power. Now we will take, for example, just one of them, which we can say associates very closely in our concept with the lower chakra of the spine. And we will now take the concept of imagination. Now, imagination is a wonderful thing. Imagination is the power which can cause the individual to extend himself from things already known toward things as yet to be known. Imagination forms a wonderful aura or a wonderful field, constantly luring the individual to further accomplishment and attainment. Imagination on the level of science has led to great progress. On the level of industry, it has caused men to envision things necessary and bring them to pass. But everything that is accomplished by man first begins as an idea, first begins as a dream about a change for the better in some way. And the energy, the effort necessary to make this progress come through is will sustaining and fulfilling the imagery of the inner life. Yet imagination, about which we could write so many charming accounts of such beautiful achievement, is also a terrible and dangerous thing. Imagination can cause the individual to turn against those who love him best. Imagination can cause him to surround his own life with demons and specters. Imagination can destroy his rest by night and his peace of mind by day. Imagination can finally bring him down a complete victim to hallucination. It can cause him to depart from reasonable and orderly ways of life and wander for the best part of a lifetime or even more than one lifetime in a fool's paradise. Imagination can cause him to see evil in the good and even as it can cause him to see good in the evil. Thus, imagination is something he has to work with. If he leaves it the way it is, he can never escape it. It will lock him completely. If he proceeds in his spiritual life, he will never know whether the visions that he sees are from God or from the disorder of his own psyche. Imagination can cause him to see things so real that he will believe them more quickly than he will believe a fact. And yet maybe they have no existence at all except within himself. And I don't know any place where imagination is more interesting than is directly in the subject of Raja Yoga. Because I have met hundreds of persons during my time who have imagined that they have passed all the way to Samadhi and come back again, and they've never left Terra Firma. I assure you. They've never gotten themselves for one moment out of the magic garden of their own wishful thinking. Yet they develop symptoms. They attain revelations. They write strange and beautiful reports. They found sex and do all kinds of things. But they have never been beyond the dreaming that results from a little reading and an overtaxing of the common sense. So, what do we do with this? Here is a part of the soul. Something has to be done about it. So we have the ancient fable that we find in India, in a beautiful painting that's in one of the temples over there, called Buddha Overcoming the Seven Planets. Here we have realization, the internal contemplation of the individual, gradually conquering the excesses of his own psychic nature. Now he has 7 primary excesses, the levels involved, to contend with. And each one of these has a progeny which must be also handled. So that in the Kabbalah of Rabbi Akiva, we find that these branches, levels, and departments of the psychic nature are said to be 7 times 7, or the 49 gates that lead finally to liberation. Because until the disciple is passed through the 49 gates, he is not free from the mystery of his own psychic nature. Now, I think you can realize rather quickly how this subject could be enlarged upon. I think you will realize that upon it could be based perhaps one of the most important texts of modern psychology, releasing us from a great many limitations of thinking, and also bringing to our attention, perhaps for the first time, the ethical significance of psychic organization. That we not only have this problem, but we must face it. Now, let us take, for example, we can't do all of these levels, so we'll just stay with this level of imagination for a while and see how we could approach it within our own psychic nature. Now, let us use a little Hindu symbolism to work with this and realize that this psychic center of imagination at the base of the spine, corresponding rather closely with the sacrococcygeal ganglia, is, as they would describe it, a basket. It is a basket of nerves. It is a basket form, not actually, symbolically. Now, don't look for handles on it. Symbolically speaking, it is a basket. And it is a basket in which a very grave and ancient yogin, whom we know as the god Shiva, who is the master of all the yogis, and who also therefore represents a power by which he is the great yoga, the master of the paths of yoga. But in this case, we have Shiva in one of his lesser forms because he now appears as a genial, kindly old snake charmer. Because in this basket is coiled up the mysterious symbolic cobra of the ancient tradition. This is the serpent of the Kundalini. Now, we find this serpent often likened to a feminine power, as in Wagner's opera Parsifal, where Kundari, the snake maiden, is merely Kundalini, dressed in the robes of snakes. Of her own accord, Kundri would serve the Knights of the Grail up on the top of the mountain, but under the spell of Klingsor, the symbol of delusion, she becomes the enemy of all that is good. And the opera unfolds around this until finally the mysterious Eucharist at the final elevation of the Grail, in which Kundry falls at the foot of the altar with her final words, "I serve," which incidentally later became associated with the heraldic device of the Prince of Wales in England. Now the Kundari Shakti, therefore, coiled in the basket, is interesting to us for the moment, because this is the seat of the spinal fire, the mysterious magic. This is the abode of the great serpent that is to eat up all the little serpents, as in the story of the rod raised in the wilderness. Now, isn't it interesting that this mysterious power should be locked in the center that corresponds with imagination? And it is perfectly proper that it should be. Because imagination is the basis of other powers, when it is gradually regenerated. Because from imagination, we gain through the transmutation of it, the discipline of it, the regeneration of it, the most powerful incentive that man has for growth. For what is faith but imagination brought under the power of the Spirit? In other words, faith is the belief in the reality of things unseen. And without the power to internally image that which is superior to his present state, man cannot grow. Therefore, the internal creative imagination must release all of the spiritual potential in man. So there, locked in the basket of imagination, is the serpent of the mysteries, the serpent of wisdom, the winged seraphs of antiquity. Also, the sleeping adept, Merlin, in his house of glass. This serpent power, then, locked here, tells us something about what we have to do. We have to learn to charm the snake. We have to learn to either handle this serpent because of our own wisdom and will, or else we will be stung by it and killed. So the snake charmer becomes, in a mysterious, symbolic way, man himself, learning to control the tremendous psychic energy which he possesses within his own nature, and which the ancients often symbolized as the serpent twisted around the egg of the world. And so it occurs in some of the Brahmin mythology. So now we come to the problem of yoga. We realize why the yogic disciplines make such tremendous emphasis of man gradually learning to control his own soul. Now, how are you going to control his own soul? We can look upon it as an enemy and begin to plan an elaborate strategy for its redemption or for our own release from its power. We can say to ourselves, let us put this imagination under complete discipline. Let us not permit ourselves to imagine anything that we do not want to imagine. And whatever we do imagine, let us place it immediately under the control of reason. Let us take every impulse, hunch, feeling, and wishful thought that comes to us, sit down, take it apart, make common sense out of it. What happens? Nothing. Precisely nothing. It's exactly like love, which is one of the powers of the soul. The more you define it, the less of it you have, until when you understand it thoroughly, there isn't any. And really much like human emotion, the more you try to control it, the more rebellious it gets. And the more certainly you know you shouldn't, the more definitely you desire to do so. So there's no answer there. And the Hindu had lived too long and lived too well to be caught by this illusion, which is little better than one of the others. Because here we have 7 powers, all of which are united in a common benignness. There are levels of them, but they are all of them basically immature and incomplete. So, we take 7 people who do not know, and we make a committee out of them. What is the result? Do they do any more for us together than they did apart? Now the mind, the mental energy of man is one of the powers of the soul, also filled with imperfection. So we allow that then to run the emotions. What do we have then? Again, the blind leading the blind. For this reason, this gradually leads us to a bit of a dilemma. Because the seven active powers of man are the powers of the soul, and he has no conscious awareness of any other faculties available to him. He doesn't know what to use in order to transcend this level of his own nature. He can rationalize, but the rational power is part of the soul and also subject to error. He can dramatize, that is more of the same. He can contemplate, that is more of the same. All of these faculties in their native condition, as the average student has to work with them, are as faulty each as the other. So to place one under the control of another is only to place one tyrant over another. The facts are not clarified. Now, in the case of imagination, we have another problem on our hands. We decide that we're going to control it. We're only going to imagine those things which are right. Next question, what is right? And how are we going to know? Blind alley again. So we will say, I'm going to take a series of abstract virtues. I shall always be kind. I shall always be gentle. I shall always be patient. I shall always be loving. Well, that's fine. But what is kindness? What is patience? What is love? What is gentleness? We love some people so much that we spoil them. We are patient at times when all we do is contribute to the delinquency of someone else. We are gentle when perhaps the occasion calls for firmness. How are we going to know which is which, what is what, and why is why? Answer is, we don't. We're not going to immediately. But here is this little bundle of imagination with a snake in it, still waiting to have something done about it. What are we going to do? The Eastern disciplines tell us there's only one thing to do, and that is to realize that in the universe, all energies represent motions. Therefore, the use of the chakra, or the whirling wheel, to symbolize these centers in the psychic nature. They are all wheels moving up on axes. The only part of the wheel that doesn't whirl is the axis, or the mysterious axle tree upon which all of them turn. Pythagoras pointed this out very clearly when he reminded his disciples that you should never put good and evil on a pair of scales and weigh one against the other, because both ends of the scale represent imbalance. The only point where balance is attained is in the center. Therefore, both extremes are always wrong. Moderation is always right. Now, when it comes to the moderating of an emotion or intensity, how do we achieve it? We achieve it by removing from it what the modern psychologist calls libido, or energy. Imagination functions because man energizes it with his own will. If he removes his will from any psychic energy field, that psychic energy immediately relaxes. And as a result of relaxation, it retires to its own normal state. Therefore, the only answer to any abnormalcy is to remove the pressure from it. Not by fighting it, not by resisting it, but by simply directing the libido away from it. The libido always representing energy, or the direction of the conscious will of the person. What would the imagination be if you devitalized it? If you simply removed from it all of the energy by which you sustain it and cause it to have a vital existence? Would imagination cease? That's a large question. The yoga doctrine says it won't cease. Instead of ceasing, it will simply return to its own essential nature and remain completely placid. And in its placidity, will then become available to be used according to the enlightened power of a superior part or nature. So in this concept, all of the 7 planets must be overcome by will and yoga. They must be overcome by the removal from them of their energy factor. Now let's see what happens, for instance, if you should remove the energy factor from love. This could be a very amazing experience. Yet would it mean that love would cease? According to the Eastern thinker, no, it would not cease. The only thing that would cease would be the exaggerations of emotion. In other words, love not directed by any ulterior pressure would then become simply itself. And in becoming itself, it would lose its possessive attributes. It would lose its intensities. It would cease to be the kind of love that smothers and kills. It would cease to be the kind of love that desires to own, to overwhelm, to absorb into itself the thing that it is associated with, and would become something that would be utterly unthinkable to the Occidental. The Occidental experiencing it would probably wonder whether the person cared for him at all or not. Because today, unless we really get excited about something, we don't really care for people. And there are actually human beings living in this world who do not believe that someone loves them unless they beat them up once a week. That is a sign of real devotion. If we care enough about people, for example, to be jealous of them, then we really love them. But what are we going to do about the toxic consequences of jealousy? Because jealousy makes us sick. And if we love something enough, we're going to almost certainly have to hate something. Because we cannot keep an unbalanced emotion moving in one direction all the time. It is bound to swing back. Therefore, if we pass through moods of tremendous exhilaration, we're almost certainly going to have a reaction, accompanied by depression. And if we have enough reactions of depression and exhilaration, we're going to end up as manic depressives and require hospitalization. So we have the Hindu system, which creates these 7 psychic centers, which control the body, function through it, and are responsible for the gradual integration of the 7 vital organs of the body, which are the shadows of these psychic centers. And these psychic centers in turn reflect themselves into the 7 major parts of the brain, and, for that matter, appear again as the 7 endocrine glands, the controllers and regulators of the body, by means of which the emotional pressures of the psyche are distributed. Well, in Buddhism, we have another division which is not very different. We have exoterically 5, esoterically 7 celestial bodhisattvas, great beings, sitting eternally in meditation. Where the Hindu places his lotus flowers along the spine, the Buddhist would place these seated figures. And the 6th and 7th thrones the Buddhist leaves empty, because he believes they represent powers of the soul that have not yet been individualized in the human being, but must be in the course of time. And also that these powers, these 7 bodhisattvic energy centers in contemplation, can be said to be the 7 redeemed powers of the psychic nature, and therefore are properly and appropriately in a state of internalization. So in the Hindu concept, the integration or the release of the Kundali Shakti and its gradual ascent is said to be the result of a conquering, one by one, the levels. or conquering these blossoms or flowers with their various petals, each marked with certain symbols of letters, garlands of tones and sounds, musical notations, and also in the heart of each one of which is seated one of the Vedic deities. These are man's soul. And through this string of soul beads runs the single thread of will. And the problem in Raja Yoga begins with the problem of bringing these parts of the psychic nature into integration. Because until they are completely and entirely integrated, the pure and absolute consciousness of man cannot come into manifestation. Because until consciousness can vitalize these centers, without these centers becoming excessive through that vitality, or without these centers misinterpreting energy or misusing it, until such time, the pure nature of energy itself, the pure nature of life consciousness, cannot be experienced by man, because it is always going to come in some conditioned form. It is always going to be hidden behind an illusion, or functioning through an unreality, representing one of these psychic gates. In the problem, then, of the imagination pattern, which we have to come back to for a moment, I think, we have this situation. How do we overcome imagination? How do we release the tremendous psychic energy which is located in the beginning of this great chain without conflict, without destroying, without perverting energy with which to destroy energy? You remember that when Amfortas, king of the Grail, resolved to destroy Klingsor, the evil magician, in his castle, he took the holy spear of Longinus, the sacred relic, and he went down into the valley with it in order to kill Klingsor with a sacred object. But what happened? He hurled the spear, Klingsor took it from him, turned and wounded him with it. And this is the inevitable result of the individual attempting to use destructive means to achieve constructive ends. The instrument turns upon him. Force is the spear of Longinus. And the force with which we try to destroy evil becomes the force that destroys us. We cannot do it. We cannot use the very means we are seeking to escape to achieve our own liberation. If we do, the thing turns upon us, and we are in trouble again. Now, in the imagination factor lurks the potential of what we may term realization. Realization is man's imaginative power to imagine the complete relaxation of the power of imagination. In other words, he possesses in each faculty of the soul the key to the suppression of the excesses of that faculty. Thus, through imagination itself, he can imagine the repose of his own soul. He can imagine the suspension. And in something which is never quiet, he has the power to imagine stillness. So in the old writings it was said that each case, the energy is withdrawn from the center and brought to the one above it. And when the focus of attention is carried away from one to the next, then the serpent conquers the Lord, because its source of extreme activity is removed. Then the power of that chakra or center is available when necessary, but never is it an inevitable pressure. It can be called upon at any time because man has the power to move his consciousness at will from one center of his own nature to another. But these centers will no longer operate independent of his own will, or will they force energy into excessive emotional patterns. Thus he overcomes. He is St. George. He slays the dragon. He conquers like Siegfried, the strange being Fafnir, who guards the treasure of the Nibelung. And the ascent in the Raja Yoga pattern is therefore the gradual removal of energy pressure from these centers by the motion of the center of awareness upward. First, from the first or lower to the second, from the second to the third to the fourth. And in this way, the neophyte or candidate climbs the ladder. In this way, he ascends the silken cord described in Muhammad's vision. In this way, he also passes through the initiations of the mid-grade mysteries. Because now we have to remember that in Raja Yoga, we have a series of steps or stages by means of which all of the essential principles of the other yogas are renewed and revived in the mind of the disciple. Thus, Raja Yoga begins with physical discipline and includes all that is necessary in what the Greeks call the cathartic methods. We have the individual learning by experience that his body is a wonderful instrument, but a very poor master. That the body is his servant, and that just as a wise master is thoughtful and just of his servant, just as the wise governor thinks first of the good of his people, so the human being must not overcome his body by subjecting it to tyranny or abuse, but through the clarification as an experience within himself of his duties to his body and his body's duties to him. And out of the entire procedure on the level of catharsis comes the recognition that the body, restored as far as possible to a completely normal and proper state, is the most useful instrument. For as dissempers and disorders of the mind afflict the reason, so pains, miseries, and infirmities of the flesh prevent the composure and the natural integration of the human character. Also, the body is a kind of sounding board, an instrument, which catches the sympathetic tones of the soul music. And if this body is defective, it will impair both the mental and emotional life of the person. It will not result in this emotional and mental life being prevented from evil manifestations. Rather, it will merely disable, disfigure, and contribute further to the difficulties of external and internal adjustments. So the body is brought under disciplines. These disciplines being thoughtfulness, watchfulness, care. Later into the same process of discipline, the yoga system introduces posture. It introduces certain positions of the body, many of them exceedingly difficult to assume and requiring great study and thought. The purposes of these postures are two. The first, that the individual shall gain the power to cause the body to obey him even into a most difficult situation. And second, because under certain phases of yoga, the electric magnetic currents of the body are caused to modify their forces and to change their rhythms according to posture. Other things likewise are added to this part of the discipline. But in sum and total, the purpose of these first stages is to clear the channels to the objective manifestation of man. Yoga teaches, for example, that the infirmities of age do not mean the infirmities of the soul, primarily, but the inability of the body to continue to distribute the energies of the soul itself. Therefore, what appears to be the failing of the mind or the loss of the energies of living should not be interpreted that these energies have failed, but that the body can no longer distribute them. Thus, to keep the body as far as possible in a condition to accomplish the maximum release of the internal is important. But this does not justify an extreme athletics in which the body is cultured, but the soul is left untutored. Or else we will have the famous description which Plato refers to when mentioning Alcibiades, when he spoke of this rich, powerful, and luxurious young man as a leaden dagger in a jeweled sheath. And it is not valuable that the body should be so ornamented that it overshadows the soul. Nor is there any need that a bad soul should have a good body. And perhaps we should realize that the reason for the growth of the body is because it is required by the inner life, and not at the expense of the inner life. So all things in moderation and order, and the disciple then passes on to the particular and definite problems of this soul life itself. And here he comes under what might be termed those rules by which the 7 deadly sins can be transformed into the 7 cardinal virtues. And not by the negative rejection of sin, but by the recognition that all energies in their right relations are good, and that what we call evil is not a principle, but a perversion of good things, and that the psychic life of man has a place, has a purpose, has a reality, but that it cannot function and fulfill that reality until it comes under the sovereignty of the will. Just as the body must be governed, so the soul must be governed. For the being and the soul are not the same. The being uses the soul even as the being and the soul together use the body. As an instrument of its purposes, the soul is a valuable and glorious thing, what the Egyptian called the jewel of 7 stars. But as a source of the administrations of mankind, the soul is as fallible as the body. A man governed by his body is in trouble. The same man governed by his soul in its present condition is also in trouble. Because in Eastern philosophy, the soul does not have the spiritual connotation that it has in Christian theology. We think now of the victory of soul over body, but that is also achieved in the chronic alcoholic. He has a complete victory of a negative psychic pattern over his physical life, and that is just as much a victory of the soul over the body as the visions and mysteries and ecstasies of the saint. So unless the soul is entitled to leadership, to act as a regent over body, it should not occupy this exalted estate. But a good soul in a sound body is a very handsome combination, the virtues of which cannot be overestimated. So having gotten the body under a certain amount of discipline, or more discipline if possible, a discipline which does not inhibit, a discipline which does not frustrate, but a discipline which dedicates, which brings things into their proper places, and makes all things good, because through proper discipline, each part fulfills itself. When we discipline the child, it is not because we hate the child, but because we desire the child to be good, to have virtue, and to become a constructive citizen. When we discipline the body, it is not because we hate it, but because it is our child, and must be taught to do those things which are necessary for its good as well as the good of the being that inhabits it. And it is with the same attitude that we approach the redemption and regeneration of the psychic nature. Now, on one level of the psychic nature, we have the passion natures of man, the intensities of hates and fears. We have greed and envy. We have all these specters that haunt the haunted house of our own internal life, and that clank their chains at night in the disturbances of dreams, like the ghost of Hamlet's father wandering the ramparts of Elsinore. So this psychic ghost world must also be put in order. It must be gradually brought into the realization that the redemption or regeneration of passion leads to compassion. And all personal emotions, when regenerated, release their universal import. Therefore, in their more constructive aspects, things are less personal and more universal, because all motion of consciousness is toward universality. For universality is union. It is that which is most necessary to achieve universals. As Plotinus defines it, the journey of the alone to the alone. The journey of the awaking all and its final union with the all. One by one, then, through disciplines, we begin to educate the powers of the soul. We educate them, and by so doing, we moderate them. It has been often observed that the more educated or enlightened an individual becomes, the less likely he is to engage in discourse. We know, therefore, that to a certain degree, wisdom impairs action. Where there is less objective activity, where there is greater thoughtfulness. The individual who knows very little is certain of everything and throws himself headlong against a solid wall. The thoughtful person does not make such exuberant misuses of energy. He has learned better. So obviously and objectively, he is less active. Actually, his activity is more meaningful. It is an enlightened action, rather than merely a tremendous expenditure of natural reserve. In these disciplines, what do we observe then? That the person gradually comes to understand the simplicities of value. He begins to recognize the dangers of his own mind, the dangers of his own reasoning power, the dangers of his own imaginings and his own intemperances. He learns to realize that the soul cannot solve his problem, but that it may become a wonderful and useful instrument for a greater purpose once it has been brought into a state of cultivation. Thus, this part of Raja Yoga may be described as the civilizing of the soul, being brought from a savage and barbaric state finally into a condition of culture. The civilized human being is the person who actually has achieved a certain internal poise, a certain control over the excesses of himself. A civilized human being can abide with others in a compatible association. And the soul, which is civilized, can abide with its own parts in a compatible state. And then as the discipline goes on, we find it becomes a little more severe, because it is pressed gradually toward the end of bringing all of these intensities to a condition in which they relax away to their own moderation. Mystics have always had this type of experience in some way, because mysticism belongs to the level of the soul. Mysticism is a psychic level. It is the level which works with emotion and which is attended by vision, trance, and mystery. The soul is mystery, and it is so veiled in the ancient allegories. So mysticism seeks gradually the benevolent experience within itself. And as Havelock Ellis reports in his Dance of Light, a very unusual report, because it is not often that an intellectualist is a mystic. It is a comparatively uncommon experience to find this. But here is a scientist, a man of attainment, who describes a mystical experience which happened to him, and which was to him a revelation which relaxed all tension within himself, removed all doubt, made fear impossible. In other words, it brought to the end for him the tyranny of psychic pressure. And that is the thing that the central parts of the disciplines of Raja Yoga is concerned with. It is the relaxation of dangerous pressures within the psychic life of the person. Whether these pressures are to the level of appetite and to emotional excess, or whether these pressures take the form of religious fanaticism, it is very little difference. The individual who is unbalanced in his devotions is as bad as the individual who is unbalanced in his vices. It is, again, an extreme condition, dangerous to the temperance of the soul. From these central disciplines, which include, therefore, various types of training, usually inclined or so directed as to gradually reveal to the individual that he is the victim of the excesses of delusion within himself, so that he experiences the fact that he is not able to trust his own feelings. Gradually he escapes from this peculiar bondage that we had in the West. In the West, a man says, I feel, therefore I do. It never occurs to him to go against his own moods. He does not know whether this mood arises from his spiritual nature, or as Samuel Johnson used to say, from a drop of green bile in his gallbladder. He doesn't know where the pressure comes from, but whatever it is, that pressure he must obey. I feel like it, therefore I do it. And, of course, as a result of that, we're in trouble most of the time. The disciplines point out that because the individual has an inclination or has a pressure, does not mean that he has to simply give in to it. Nor does it mean that he is going to frustrate himself, clench his teeth, and deny it. The answer lies to examine it, and gradually, through his own enlightenment, to dispel it because it is no longer valid. That in his thoughtfulness and in his relaxation, he knows that this pressure is not himself, and does not bear witness to the true nature and quality of his own consciousness. So one by one, pressures are moderated. And there are two ways, of course, of moderating them. One is symbolically on the outside, and the other is factually on the inside. And these parallels of symbolism work together. For instance, a man has spent all his life saving his money, and he finally has quite a tidy sum. Now, his religion may tell him that he shouldn't have all that money. Then comes a very serious emergency in his own consciousness. If, in his own conviction, he comes to that point where he realizes that he should spend some part of that money to help someone less fortunate than himself, and he does so, this is an experience symbolically. Because by the action, which is a form of mudra, by the action of giving, he has stated giving within himself. He has released something of the intensity of his own soul when he was able to part with some part of his own material goods. Later, through understanding perhaps, he renounces all his worldly treasures and in so doing states. Also, the renunciation of his own instinct to accumulate, which is the basic problem, not the things he has accumulated. It is the will to accumulate that assembles the symbolic objects. But when this individual decides that it is more important to him to become than it is to possess, he transmutes an instinct. Sometimes the physical action must come first, because it represents a strenuous dedication on a level where the enlightenment does not yet exist. But it must gradually be followed by an internal renunciation. Now, it is easy to renounce many of the things we have. I know people who can give away everything they have, but they can never spare an opinion. That is sacred. I've heard people say, I've given away a fortune, but don't ask me to like my brother-in-law. That is an attitude I can't give up. That is more important to me than all the money in the world. Or, another one will take some other cherished fetish, which he continues to possess. And always possession is symbolized by the things possessed. To release the thing is to state from the outside to the inside the release of a pressure. Whereas the release of the internal incentive may mean the falling away of the external things. Now, in yoga, there is no great virtue, essentially, in a man being poor. The only reason is that on the level of conduct, very few individuals can afford to be rich because of the damage it does to them. If they could afford to be rich, there is no reason why they shouldn't be. But when they are, it is very likely they become absolute servants and slaves to what they have. They are not wise administrators. They are possessors, hugging their possessions to themselves and dying locked in the embrace of things. This is dangerous. Not because the things are bad, but because the individual has become addicted to the wrong series of values. If he has the right values, he may possess anything. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, and all other things shall be added unto you. Now, many individuals have taken that to mean that by certain spiritual affirmations they can become millionaires. That is not the principle. It means that only the individual who is completely oriented in his own spiritual life can afford to have things. Anyone else who has them is possessed by them and locked in with them in a hopeless bondage. So Raja Yoga begins to break away these attachments. It breaks them away rationally. It breaks them away persuasively. It breaks them away by recourse to the great religious incentives of the true believers. It makes virtues out of regeneration and renunciation. But the purpose is always the same. It is not important what a man renounces. It is that the man renounces the impulse to possess. Because as long as that impulse remains, he's going to be subject to illusion. And the energy of his being is going to be channeled into that accumulative and acquisitive process. He's going to be like the blinded Samson, who was bound to the millstone of the Philistines. A divine power bound to mortgages, chattel, foreclosures, bank accounts, and taxes. Now, as long as that locking remains, that individual can never be a citizen of the universe. So in the central parts of Raja Yoga, there is this process of preparation. The individual gradually silences the pressures and tensions of his own soul. And he fashions out of the soul itself, by its complete regeneration, by its complete transformation. He transforms it into the Arhat Self. he transforms it into the transcendent being, which is a new psychic nature, the psychic nature of the fabled Rishi of the Indian legend. The saint is actually every man's sanctified soul, the saint within. It is the soul that has been separated from its intensities, and by that virtue alone has become an intercessor between the outer and inner life of man. Thus, in most religions, even beyond the borders of Christendom, the intercession of saints, or the power of sanctified persons to carry the supplications of the faithful to their spiritual Father in heaven. Such beliefs exist. But this sanctified arhat, this canonized saint, is the redeemed psychic self. And the most simple and natural way in which a saint is canonized in the Catholic Church is martyrdom. Therefore, again, it is the soul that dies for its faith, or is gradually reduced from its intensities, so that its intensities die, that is suitable for canonization. The other type of saint is the result of the proof of miracles. So what do we have? We have the soul as the wonder worker, the great yogin. We have the soul as the magician. We have the soul like Prospero in the Tempest, who waving his magic wand can change the face of all things. We have the soul as a kind of guru also, an inner teacher. But only after it has passed along the traditional road, has itself achieved the purification, and has attained to its own natural destiny. So the teacher within can become the soul. For the soul is also the abode of the 7 liberal arts and sciences. It is the abode of all the great laws, the great principles of geometry, mathematics, astronomy, music, architecture, medicine, law, all these things, because they belong to the mental psychic life of man, are all resident in the soul power. So the soul becomes the physician, the legislator, the creator, within its own emotional level. And it is then regenerated, redeemed from its original and former state of disorder and asymmetry. The soul is the natural abode of the beautiful. And the beautiful is that which is in ordered peace. And out of the redemption or regeneration of the soul, through discipline, comes what the Rosicrucian Meyer calls the silentum post clamores, the silence after the sounds, or after the noise. And the confusion or noise is man's negative psychic life, and the silence is that which comes when the soul is in order, and all things have achieved their proper place. Now the soul, when it is thus ordered, becomes the vestment of glory. It becomes the psychic body of the being which inhabits it. And it also makes possible the journey onward to that which lies beyond. Because until after the consciousness has passed through the trials and tribulations of the psychic adjustment, it is not ready to hear the voice of the infinite, which speaks only in the great silence of peace, or the transcendency over confusion or discord. So we find that having climbed the ladder of the 7 stars, and having conquered the 7 worlds of the soul, having wandered away and finally escaped by the thread of Ariadne from the labyrinth of the Minotaur, which is again this pattern of psychic involvement, the being, the psychic nature, the Kundalini, has ascended through the 7 gates, and the being approaches the mystery of illumination. Now, I tried to explain in part last week this idea of the reversal of subject-object relationship. And in this, I wanted once more bring this point out because one or two of the friends seemed to feel there was a little uncertainty on the matter. In Eastern mysticism, we relax into a state of truth. Whereas in the Western school, we gird ourselves in the full honor of the doctrine and go out fighting for it. In the West, the concept is that truth must be conquered. We must get hold of it. We must possess it. We must be able to say, well, you don't know what you're talking about, but I know the truth. I have it. So it's a sort of a chapel that you toss around, and everyone has it, and no two people agree as to what it is. The more they talk about it, the less certain we are they have it. And by the time they've described it fully, we know they don't have it. But at the same moment, we know we have, and we're trying to get a word in between there. So that to our Western concept, truth is something that's not so different from a house or an automobile or something of that nature. It's something we can get hold of. Why do we think that way about it? Largely because we associate it with our concept of education. We assume that education is going to bestow the truth upon us. Therefore, that it is to be found in books and that it can be demonstrated by passing the examination at the end of the term. And that when we finally have the diploma, we have it all. We've got it. Now all we have to do is go out and win fame and fortune with it. That is our way of thinking. Truth is something that we admire, we adore, we venerate. We can conceive of nothing greater. And yet we seem to have the instinctive belief that it is something that we have, and we can give it to you, and you can give it back to us, and we can toss it around among our friends, and that it is something that some way we can possess. In the East, there's a little different thinking on this matter. In the first place, truth is too big for us to possess. If truth isn't bigger than we are, if it is something that we can hold in our hands, it is small indeed. Some will say, yes, it probably is tremendously simple. That's been one of the difficulties. We've always missed it because we've made it too complicated. Truth is probably indescribably simple. But it is also so simple that we cannot hold it in our hands because it disappears. It does not mean that truth is stupendous and that the more erudition we have, the nearer we are to it. It means, however, that to the Eastern concept of reality, truth is something that is so infinitely beyond the finite that man simply cannot possess it. Also in the Eastern mind, truth, as the great master of the gurus, is not something. It doesn't have sides or corners or a top and bottom. It doesn't abide somewhere. It doesn't have an appearance like a person or a thing. It isn't even a great light. It is not that type of thing at all. In the Eastern mind, truth, law, life, love, reality are all names for one thing. Truth is only a name for being. And the supreme truth for man is the simple statement that being is. You can really go not much further without beginning to get into trouble. Therefore, his acceptance of the existence of a supreme reality probably comes as close to truth as he can fashion it in thought. And an infinite tenderness toward this reality, an infinite longing, the love that is only the love of the real, is probably his nearest emotional approach to it. So his love for reality and his statement, the internal conviction of the reality of the infinite, These are probably the nearest things to truth that he can objectively understand. But in Raja Yoga, being is at the root of will. Will is a motion of being. And will itself, when freed of all involvements, is the eternal will. Man does not have, ultimately, a will of his own. He has an eternal will that is channeled through him. As long as he is the channel, the will look like him, in some way partake of him, and be measured by him, as the water is measured for the vessel which contains it. Yet if we remove the vessel, the water is formless. If we remove the personality of man, the principles within him are formless. They do not look like him. They do not think like him. They only look like him because they are moving through him. They only think like him because his mind and his brain are their temporary instruments. But these energies themselves are superior to him and have no actual limitation except in a limitation of illusional appearance. Substantially, they are infinite. The very will that man experiences as the power within his own consciousness carries with it truth. Therefore, truth moves in man and through man, and it does not come to him. Truth is identical with his own life principle itself. Thus he can never possess it, because in the first place he never lost it. And at the same time, possession implies that he can some way circumscribe it and make it his own. He cannot, because it belongs to everything. There is just as much eternal truth radiating through an unfolding flower as there is through an unfolding saint. Truth is identical in principle with the experience of life itself. To experience life completely is to experience truth. To experience truth completely is to experience love. And to experience love completely is to experience law. They are all one tremendous integrity. In this integrity, man lives and moves and has his being, because there is no place where it is not. As the old Hindu says, it extends to the end of the cosmos and 3 inches beyond. It goes forever and 3 inches. There is no conceivable place where there is a deprivation of it. And what appears to be a deprivation is an obscuration by form, mind, or illusion. If, therefore, man starts searching for his own nature, and he industriously traces the current of his own will to its source, he is not going to find there his own personal equivalent of an aged, bearded relative. He is not going to find a spirit in the form of an old man sitting on a throne. He is not even going to find his own spirit, any more than he's going to find his own truth. Can we really actually conceive of truth belonging to anyone? Finally, when we think about it. Can we believe in a spirit that is a nice, separate little being, sitting all by itself somewhere in the midst of space, and that this is us, this is our reality? The Indian cannot think that way. He believes that as he moves toward the source of his own consciousness, that he doesn't move toward a being sitting somewhere, or an entity, luminous or otherwise, or some mysterious little whirling spirilla of cosmic force. He does not conceive that. Because even the moderate development of his own faculties and the gradual extension of his own consciousness through discipline causes him to realize that he is moving from the small end of a funnel toward the large end, and not from the large end toward the small end. He finds that the further he goes, the fewer are his own boundaries, and that ignorance is making this little package, and that wisdom is breaking it open. That the more ignorant he is, the more personal he is. The more he thinks about himself, the less he thinks about anything else. The more he begins to experience, the broader he becomes. Well, if a man gets broader and broader and broader and keeps on getting broader long enough, he is no longer broader. He is bred. He is absorbed into the principle itself. If the individual gets better and better and better and better, we assume that sometime he will get to be best. But when we think about it more, best doesn't seem to have very much significance. It's a little, it's the more flawless gem, but it's still something, because beyond even the best, we must assume something. The only way that we can move from better to better and better without coming to the end of something is to finally realize that all betterness leads towards eternal good, which is at the end. That if the individual knows enough, about enough, and learns more about enough, and keeps on learning and knowing and learning, he cannot ultimately become just wise, because that's another little package. The only thing he can become is wisdom. The end of all attributes must be the principle. Without wisdom, no one could be wise. So wisdom, and not the wise man, is the root of things. So if the wise man goes along the currents long enough, he is going to arrive at wisdom, which is the root of all being wise. In this thinking, then, the Oriental thinks of the extension of consciousness as leading finally not to an isolated position of superiority, but to the final identification of the divided part with its own totality. And this totality is all of everything, all of wisdom, all of life, all of truth, all of law. And the only time the seeking can end is in totality. Because we cannot imagine a universe composed of an infinite number of separate things, all perfect. Because if they are perfect, they are alike. And if they are alike to that degree of utter sameness, our own common intelligence begins to tell us that they become one thing. Things that are absolutely alike are one thing. Because there must be some dissimilarity to keep them separate. When there is no dissimilarity, there is no longer boundary, and they move into the eternal. So man does not possess truth, but he experiences the release of truth through himself and in himself. And through the gradual refinement of consciousness and the attainment of samadhi, he comes as nearly as the human being can come and still exist to the complete experience of universality within himself. He experiences the reversal of the subject-object relationship. Instead of being the man seeking truth, he experiences, rather, truth seeking him, or coming through him, moving toward him. As he approaches it, it approaches him. And finally, he comes to the experience of the relation of the part to the whole, and realizes that he can never possess it, but that it has always possessed him, but he didn't know it. And the awakening is the recognition of the state that has always been, not a different state. And this awakening cannot be a shock, and it cannot be stressful, because it is gradual. And by the time it is reached, it is the only acceptable end. Now, there have been many interpretations of the samadhi experience. Some think that it is simply a highly developed psychic state in which the individual achieves the complete transition or the complete suspension of his own faculties. And that the whole mystery is on a psychological level. I do not think that is true. I think it can be true, particularly in the practice of Hatha Yoga. But I do not believe that it is essentially true. For, if samadhi is the experience of a being nullifying itself, voluntarily becoming nothing, nothing from nothing comes. And the ascetic practicing this and returning to objectivity would come back from a vacuum and bring nothing. Because he cannot bring something from nothing. If it is merely negation, if he is merely psychically gone to sleep rather than physically gone to sleep, then he has entered a state of non-existence, temporarily at least, and nothing returns. He can experience nothing, he can gain nothing, he can know nothing, because he has destroyed or temporarily subjugated all means of interpretation and all means of reaction. On the other hand, as in the case of Havelock Ellis, in the actual samadhi, the consciousness passes from a state of negative into a highly positive relation. Because this transition does not end in nothing, but it ends in the experience of absolute fullness. And returning from the samadhi, the ascetic returns with a complete concept of relationship with all else that exists, with an immediate personal apperception of realities, which will cause and does cause a complete reversion or change in his life. Therefore, the state he goes into cannot be negative, because he experiences it as the solution to everything. As in the case of Ellis, who came back without doubt, fear, worry, question. He had found an absolute internal experience of sufficient and complete answer. He couldn't put it in words. But he knew from that time on that, to use our phrase, God was in his heavens and all was right with the world. He knew it. Therefore, this experience cannot be negative because of its reaction upon the conduct of the person. It is therefore a glimpse of a universality of realities. It is as though the individual drank from the sea of absolute life. It isn't his sea because others will drink from it. All will drink from it. And in so doing, they will discover that they are it. And therefore, it will be no shock to them to realize that this one great ocean of life supports the spiritual, moral, and physical life of everything, and is the energy within it, which in its own nature produces the phenomenon of will, and on the psychic level is interpreted as the libido, and on the material level as energy. It is this one life. And as the Buddhist doctrine says, the nirvana of that is the experience of the drop of water returning to the sea. It is returning to a state of allness, not a state of nothingness. Therefore, the individual is not deprived of his own precious existence. He is restored to the sublime fact of eternal existence and his eternity in it. Now, before he can appreciate and probably enjoy all of this, he must pass from the condition in which particulars are important to him to that state in which the experience of the absolute generality is the complete fulfillment. Then he is no longer seeking for his God. He has experienced Godhood in himself and in all things that exist. But this is not a personal Godhood. This is the Godhood of the sovereignty of reality. And in reality is the root of everything that is so. And the only thing that man must renounce to find it is that which is not so. And he can never make that which is not so real. And he can never for one instant destroy the reality of that which is so. So his final decision to remain true to truth means that ultimately he will experience re-identification with it because it is himself. He is just as much truth as he is life. He is just as much reality as he is person, in fact, much more. So through the person is revealed to the objective and fragment of reality. But as man goes by discipline and improves, refines, enlarges, and releases, he returns to reality. He does not find it in the sense of gaining it for himself. He is simply restored to a state which is eternally his own, and from which he is separated at all times by nothing but the thin thread of his own ignorance. This, I think, is the substance that I would like you to remember in connection with the yoga principle. And I think it will help to make the subject of Raja Yoga a little clearer to you on the level of principles. Now, tonight we end this particular series. And next week we're going to begin our study of alchemy.